Hello everybody, it's the Historical Gamer once again, and today I'm going to be talking about a little bit of gaming news. We do this every once in a while on the channel. It's been a while since our last update, but I don't know, like a year ago, we talked about the B-17 game that Microprose is working on, and there was recently an interview given by the CEO of Microprose, David Lagettie. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. With PC Pilot, which is a flight sim magazine, where he talked about some exciting news. So you'll probably already know from the title of this video, the big reveal in that interview was that Microprose is working on Falcon 5.0, which is pretty exciting. The Falcon series is sort of one of the long-running series in flight sims. It predates DCS. It predates most flight sims. It was in the very early days of flight sims. But the real standout game in that series was Falcon 4.0, which was also the last game in the series. And the reason is it combined an almost DCS-like level of detail in terms of like fully clickable cockpits, or almost. And like 300-page manuals to learn how to fly with a fully dynamic campaign, which is something that like the leaders in the flight sim world still don't have. IL-2 doesn't have it. DCS doesn't have it. And so you had this fully dynamic campaign in Korea coupled with a F-16 flight model that is still very well regarded and is still alive to a certain extent. There are modders out there who are continuing to support the Falcon 4.0 code and releasing tons of new maps and features, and or if not features, but tons of new like maps and campaigns and things like that. The folks over at BMS, Falcon BMS, is sort of the currently living, I would say the main group of folks out there still supporting Falcon. And in this interview in PC Pilot, David Lagettie said that Falcon 5.0 is currently in the planning stages. Now, what does that mean? Well, planning stages, that probably means they're very early on. They may not have even started coding, or if they have, it's very preliminary. So I don't think this means Falcon 5.0 is coming out next year. Certainly it's not coming out this year. I mean, we've seen this with Microprose lately where they announce a game and then years go by and it still hasn't come out yet. They do seem to announce games a little bit earlier than I would if I was in charge, but I understand the need to continue to generate buzz and generate, excitement around the brand, and so there definitely is a logic to it. But as we've seen with other games like Sea Power or Task Force Admiral, which, by the way, Task Force Admiral has some pretty interesting updates and stuff that folks are sharing out. I actually have I'm meaning to do something on that as well. But yeah, anyway, as we've seen with those games which were announced when Microprose sort of stepped back into the ring of being a company 2-3 years ago when David bought the rights to the Microprose name and he restarted the company with a whole new cast of characters. When that all started, they announced a bunch of these games, and I think the only one that they initially announced when the game when the company relaunched was Second Front. And I think that's the only of the original 3 games which they've announced that have launched. There have been other games that have come out. Ground Branch, I believe, signed with Microprose. We've gotten that Harrier game. Oh my goodness, I'm forgetting what it's called. Tiny Combat Arena, that's it. And then Carrier Command 2 also came out, and they've started selling older versions of the Microprose games as they've acquired the rights. They actually acquired the rights to the Falcon series. I think it was earlier this year, and there's a fair bit of news around it. But now we know that Falcon 5.0 is on their roadmap and will be worked on. So that's exciting. I'm not going to spoil the whole interview. If you are interested in checking it out, you can go over to PC Pilot magazine and check it out there. It is behind a paywall, but I don't think it would be terribly fair for me to just, read the whole interview. There's some interesting tidbits in there about Falcon. There's also some interesting tidbits in there about the B-17 games that they're working on, which we'll talk about here in a moment. But that's really all there is to say. Falcon 5.0 is in the planning stages. It's going to include more aircraft than just the F-16, which is all that was in Falcon 4.0. It's going to actually include the F-35. And they're working on more than just, one theater. The original game was only in Korea. There was a kind of a re-release or remaster sort of game called Falcon 4.0 Allied Force, which is done by a different developer, which added the Balkans. And then the BMS folks have added some more stuff as well. But they've said they're going to expand the world, if you will. One other piece I'll also say is it's pretty cool that it sounds like they're trying to make the game approachable to other people. I think one of my championing things about the flight sim community is that it can be a bit exclusive. And what I mean by that, and I don't mean this as a shot at anyone, but there are a lot of very passionate folks in the flight sim community who you would probably call rivet counters, who they want everything exactly correct, every button clickable. You got to read a 300-page manual that's, like in a binder, like the original Falcon 4.0, in order to learn how to fly. Like, not an approachable game, right? You need to put hours into figuring out how things work. That's how a lot of the flight sim community sort of views these things. They're not games to an extent. They're passions, if you will. And that is great and creates an awesome experience, but it does not create an experience that is opening and inclusive to folks who may not have that kind of time, or frankly, who may be turned off by the fact that they need to spend hours learning how to just turn the jet on so they can go fly. And so I do think there is sort of a tendency in the flight sim community to not be as welcoming to new folks, unless they're willing to go absolutely hardcore. And it would be nice if there were more sort of gateway drugs to the flight simming world. Nowadays it's like you got DCS, and then a little bit less overwhelming, you got IL2 on the sim side, and then you've got like War Thunder and World of, do they have World of Aircraft? They have World of Tanks and Warships. I don't know if they still do have an aircraft version, but you've got like War Thunder, basically, which is sort of the more casual group. I know they have a simulation thing, guys. Don't come for me, but really, War Thunder is the more casual group, and then you've got sort of the DCS and the IL, and then there's some other stuff in there like Tiny Combat Arena, which I think is great, but like not super high profile stuff. So another thing that they also did mention in the interview was they wanted to have more approachable entryways for folks into the game. So you would still have the hardcore detailed version of the game, but you'd also have like difficulty levels where you can make things more approachable. And I think that is a great idea. I played a lot of Falcon 4.0 in high school, but I did not read through everything on how all of the different systems work in the aircraft. I did not really know how to handle the aircraft from a technical point of view, in terms, especially around like the radar and the fire control solutions for the more advanced weapons. The dumb bombs were fairly straightforward, but as you would expect. But what Falcon 4.0 had that was great was it had a combat autopilot that basically would fly the entire mission for you if you wanted, and you could kind of just jump in and control things when you wanted to. And it had a lot of customization in terms of how far down the rabbit hole you wanted to go. And so it sounds like they're going to be doing that a bit with Falcon 5.0, which is exciting. But yeah, that's the news today. Falcon 5.0 in planning stages. And also there was some detail in there about their plan to support the folks at BMS with some additional content for the existing Falcon 4.0 mods that are supported by the BMS sim folks. So that's cool that they're working with the modders who are currently keeping Falcon 4.0 alive. Maybe allowing that to, get even better in the meantime, because I think we're years away from Falcon 5.0. Now, changing gears a bit. The other bit of news that I want to talk about was the interview also delved into B-17. Microprose has 4 B-17 games that are currently in the works. They've got B-17 The Mighty Eighth Redux, which is a remaster of B-17 The Mighty Eighth, which is one of my favorite and one of the sort of really cherished B-17 flight sims out there. It's a Microprose game, and what you're looking at right now is actually the trailer for B-17 The Mighty Eighth. So it doesn't look great, right? It looks dated, but that's because it's trailer and some footage. But that's because it is a very old game. It's 20 years old. But in this game, in B-17 The Mighty Eighth, you had the ability to be in command of a B-17 through all 25 missions in World War II. But then you also had the ability to take over as a squadron commander, and it added some strategic elements of like, all right, where are we going to attack? You had to plan missions out plan the actual payload that was in the aircraft, pick which aircraft in the squadron are going to fly, and then you go and you fly and you see the results, and you also participate in those raids, jumping around the aircraft, any of the 10 different positions within the aircraft. And you could even, jump into fighters and escort, or even jump into the German interceptors and shoot your own planes down if you wanted to do that. And so it was a really awesome B-17 simulation game. And they're working on a remaster for that. So B-17 Redux is going to be apparently coming into early access by around the Christmas time period this year. So it's the first sort of real concrete date we've had on any of the 4 B-17 games that they're working on. And so that's really exciting. They also did mention in the interview that they're looking at new game modes as well. So the original game, you could play I think it was historical encounters, not really missions per se. You couldn't jump in and do Schweinfurt, I don't think, but you could do historical encounters of hey, there was this, engagement with an ME-262 near the end of the war and whatever. And you could do that, and then you could do the actual campaign. So you had sort of the single mission encounters, and then you had the campaign. Not sure what the additional game modes could be, but they did reference that they were looking at bringing new game modes. But really the big news here is that B-17 Redux will be coming to early access around Christmas time frame. There was some more detail that they talked about around the fact that they're still working on B-17 The Bloody 100th, which is sort of the sequel to B-17 The Mighty Eighth. It'll be a standalone game in the vein of B-17 The Mighty Eighth, but it'll be completely new game from the ground up, so they won't be remastering. They won't be tied to all the limitations, presumably, that come with B-17 The Mighty Eighth. Presumably, they'll have a lot more aircraft involved. That's one of the sort of downsides of the Mighty Eighth, was that I think you only ever had 24 bombers in the sky, or maybe it was only 12. You had 2 sections. You had a high and a low section. You had your squadron, and then there was sort of a second squadron that you had no real insight or control over, but they were there flying in formation with you. And so the sky was always a little bit empty in that game. And that was, again, the game was made 20 years ago, so presumably that was due to hardware limitations. B-17, the Bloody 100th, will have a lot more aircraft, as I believe what they've sort of teased in terms of the number of aircraft and also the flyable aircraft. It sounds like there's the B-24, which they had previously talked about, maybe even the B-26 and 25. I'm not sure. But we'll see. The more I hear about Bloody 100th, the more it sounds like it might be almost like a European Air War type game, which was another, I think, wasn't that Microprose, European Air War, which was they had huge formations of bombers, but the graphics were much more basic. And that was a completely different game. But anyway, B-17 The Bloody 100th is still in development, as well as B-17 VR, which is another B-17 game that Microprose is working on. That'll be more narrative focused and having you in a bomber and a VR sort of setup. And I believe that game is also going to lean heavily into co-op type play, which could be fun to play. But I'm much more of I want to play a single player campaign. I want to play through the war. I want to, go through all the different targets. That's the kind of stuff that interests me. But what have you. And I'm kind of intermixing at this point, just for footage sake. We're intermixing some screenshots of what they've released through Microprose. So some of the screenshots are B-17 VR. Some of them are B-17 The Bloody 100th. And on the front end of this stuff, you saw a little bit of B-17 The Mighty Eighth, and then Redux as well. But yeah, that's sort of the news. Again, it's just taken from an interview with David Lagettie on PC Pilot. If you are interested, there's a link in the description where you can check the interview out. Again, it is behind a paywall, but I just wanted to talk to you guys about this a bit because we did a really popular video announcing B-17 The Mighty Eighth's sequel, which has turned into B-17 The Bloody 100th. I haven't really posted any updates here, and while I know a lot of you are following these updates on Twitter or on various flight sim websites, a lot of you don't. I think that's a gap in the wargaming community and the flight simming community. I don't think there's a huge presence of quote unquote news channels online or on YouTube. And a lot of people don't go to tech sites to read anymore, for better or worse. I'm a reader. I'm sure many of you are as well. But a lot of folks are going to be on YouTube, but they're not necessarily looking out there at flight sim websites to see what's going on. And so if you're scrolling through YouTube, or even if you do go to those sites, you may not check them super regularly. And so my thought process always is, if there's something that is out there as news but doesn't seem super prevalent on YouTube, I may talk about it here, just because a lot of folks watching here probably haven't heard about this news before. So that's why I'm rambling to you right now. Anyway, guys, that's the news I have for you. Falcon 5.0 in the works. B-17, B-17, the Mighty Eighth Redux coming to early access by around Christmas time period of this year. And the other B-17 games are continually being worked on. If you're interested in checking the interview out, which has some cool information about how they were able to get the source code that they needed to do the remaster for B-17, or how they, how they're thinking about Falcon 5.0, or just a little bit of information about David Lagettie and how he came into some of these licenses, a lot of that stuff is in the interview. So check the link in the description and go over there and check it out. But thanks again for coming out, guys. Hope you guys enjoyed this update, if you will. And until next time, this is the Historical Gamer saying thank you for watching, and I'm out.